Hello everyone watching. Today I'm joined with Adelaide from Confident Canine, and you have very kindly sent in several questions for her regarding dog training. So we've been through them all, we've picked out the top questions and we're going to answer them today. So Adelaide, if you want to introduce yourself and what you do.
Hi Amelia, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm really excited to be able to share some of my information and help some of your clients. I'm Adelaide, I'm from the Confident Canine in Worcestershire. We are trainers and behaviourists, and we deal with pet dog problems.
Amazing. So we've had several questions. A lot of them were pretty similar, so we can go through them one by one. The first question being, how do I stop my dog from barking when someone leaves?
So when we're dealing with barking issues, first of all, we need to understand or try and understand why the dog is barking. Because barking, as you can imagine, can mean many different things in different contexts, in different places. And so ultimately, I would be asking questions around, is it with the same person? Is the dog left alone? Does it occur anywhere else apart from the home? So I find that dogs that bark tend to bark in other places as well, like the car, or at other dogs, at other people's houses. We have to do a bit of investigating because there's no quick answer that I can suggest that would say, for example, do this and then your dog won't bark when you leave. Too many variables.
That's completely understandable. I mean, we've got dogs here in the office and they bark at everything, so we never really know what it is, but dogs will be dogs, I suppose.
Yeah, so for example, if a dog is uncomfortable being left home alone, then that would be something that I'd be working on the separation anxiety side, because the root cause of that dog barking might be fear of being left alone, for example.
Definitely. So one of the next questions is, well, it's more of a scenario. So my dog has a bad habit at night where he barks like crazy to be let out for his last wee in the garden. He literally goes crazy, spinning around, and then sprints out into the garden and has a massive bark fest. He's territorial, and there are multiple cats and foxes that traverse the garden, but this is a specific nighttime thing. Is there any advice you can give on this one?
So this is a great question because it's really specific. Now, a couple of things might have occurred with that dog. It might have actually seen a fox in the garden at some point and therefore became quite territorial and displayed behaviours as you described. Another situation is that the dog might have got into a habit of doing this every night. What we need to do here is actually break that habit. It may be that the dog has never seen anything in the garden and it just enjoys barking every night. So to break that habit, what I'd recommend is popping the dog on the lead and actually taking it out several times at different intervals through the evening, not just the last time it goes out for a toilet before bedtime. By keeping it on the lead, you retain some an element of control, so they're not just tearing around the garden barking, because what that does is it's self-rewarding, and so therefore as it barks and runs, it enjoys that behavior and therefore wants to do it again. So by putting it on the lead, simply that you actually remove the possibility of that. Of course, it's going to still bark and want to chase around the garden. But the other thing that you can do is reinforce an alternative behavior. So with some food, when you take your dog out into the garden on the lead, I would recommend marking and rewarding calm behavior. So I would not expect miracles straight away. Now, this has to be a gradual process, and not to expect your dog to be completely calm straight away. So even if the dog doesn't bark but whines and looks agitated or excited, I would still mark and reward that at first, because that's progression from the dog actually barking and running.
Definitely.
So mark and reward calmer behaviour, shall I say. If your dog suddenly gets excited and starts barking and jumping on the lead, then I would bring it back inside and then wait sort of 5-10 minutes, have a break till the dog's calmed down, and then repeat the process. So effectively you're desensitizing the dog to this ritual that they've got into in the evening. You want to build on that.
So, next question. I found this one very interesting. Why does my dog prefer to walk in a certain direction? He'll just crouch down, dig his heels in, and not budge till we go in the direction he wants.
So this is a great question as well, because again, there's a lot of context that I would need to know about this, because, and I'll give you a few examples. The dog might have got a fright on a particular route and just doesn't want to go down that way. The dog also may have a preferred route itself. So we need to work with that. The other scenario is it may have learned that it can do that with that particular owner. So dogs are very clever, and once they know something works, they'll do it over and over again.
This actually reminds me of a scenario that my friend was telling me yesterday. She took her dog on a walk and he literally took her to pets at home because he knew exactly where it was and that she wouldn't say no. So
Oh, brilliant. What I wouldn't recommend doing if your dog digs its heels in and completely stops is pulling on the lead, because that doesn't really achieve anything. We don't know in this context why the dog is stopping, and maybe it's afraid. So we need to really work with that. I would personally use some food to positively reinforce moving forward. Don't forget that even one step forward or even just standing up should be rewarded, because that is the dog starting to move forward. I would very heavily reward each incremental tiny step that the dog does towards moving forward down the road. Another question I'd be asking is, why does that dog want to go into that particular direction? Is it a smell? Is it a particular place? If this behavior causes a problem, I would avoid that particular route. I'd recommend varying your walk and making sure that this behavior doesn't occur anywhere else. If it doesn't, then it's very location specific, and we can work on that using plenty of food and encouragement. But if the dog does this regularly in a variety of places, then I would be discussing some behavioral issues in terms of, is that dog in a habit of doing that with the owner, or does the dog not actually enjoy walks for another reason? Is it in pain? Does it have some joint issues? Things like that. Another thing that I would recommend with this dog that stops is using very high value treats. We need to work with their level of motivation. So if we offer them something that they're not that interested in, they're not going to be ready to work with us. So what I find useful is soft, more wet treats, just like the white fish sausages, something chewy or soft or moist.
One thing about those treats as well is they're actually very popular, particularly with one of our ambassadors that comes to mind is Ivy. She loves them, but they're also only 1% in fat too, which makes them even better to feed as regularly as you need to, really.
Absolutely. With all training, sometimes there's a lot of repetition involved, so that's a really good point.
And this one's more of a scenario again. So we've got, when walking off the lead, my dog can be very well behaved if treats are involved. However, occasionally she must sense something and she'll be gone. No attempts at recall, no treats, nothing works, and we spend ages trying to find her. Recently, it has happened a couple of times and we've ended up buying a tracker to help locate her again. Our biggest concern is that she might find her way off into a field or woods and onto roads where she has no road sense. Any advice is appreciated.
Yeah, so I really feel the owner's stress there, because it's incredibly stressful when that happens. 100% I would recommend using a harness and attaching a long line to that harness. If anyone doesn't know what a long line is, it's effectively a 5 or 10 meter lead, just a normal flat lead. Now, I only ever use 3, 5, or 10 meter long lines, because if you can't recall your dog at 10 meters, it's definitely not going to come back at 15 or 20. The other reason is that holding the long line and managing the long line can be quite difficult when your long line is very long. First of all, I'd make sure that you train in an area that is easy for your dog to focus. So depending on how good this dog's recall is, that would be my first focal point, is ensuring it's got really good recall. Practice the basics at home. Does it come back at home from one room to the next? If the answer is yes, then try in the garden. Then you can start progressing to open fields or parks where it's not too busy. So you've got dogs at a distance, for example. So there are distractions, but they're quite far away, so the dog's still able to focus. Always have your dog on a long line, because as you're progressing through the difficulty, so as you're exposing the dog to more and more distractions and tempting the dog effectively, you want to make sure that you have a solid recall. You want to be almost certain that your dog will come back. If your dog's not on a long line and it does run off, what that teaches the dog is that it can ignore you, and it's very exhilarating for the dog to run off after this particular scent or squirrel or whatever it is it's chasing. So therefore, again, it reinforces to the dog that that's fun. And therefore, it's going to be more likely to do it again because it knows how fun that is. So we want to take away the opportunities that it has to practice that behaviour. And so as you progress with your recall training, make sure you reinforce your dog every single time it comes back. So that's really important, and I can't stress how important that is, because even though you think that your dog is fairly well trained, don't be shy in using lots and lots of food, especially if your dog is food motivated. If your dog is motivated by other things such as toys or anything like that, that's another conversation. But I'm just using food as an example because it's a very common way to reinforce your dogs. As you gradually build your distractions, allow your dog to go a few meters ahead of you. And when you notice them looking at a certain distraction or being interested in a scent, see if you can call them back. If they come back, if they leave the thing that they're interested in, so they look away or lift their nose up from the floor and come back to you, I would make a big point of that and give them plenty of food, plenty of treats, and praise them, verbally praise them. Make a big thing about that, because in those moments, that dog's made a choice and it has chosen to come back to you, even though something else is interesting. Now, it will remember those moments. Yeah, and so, I would advise going through this process of keeping the dog safe on the long line, but then progressively training in the areas I call hotspots, where there are lots of squirrels, once you know that your recall is quite well established. The other thing to bear in mind is your level of reinforcement. So, for example, if your dog particularly likes a certain treat or a certain ball or certain type of food, I would use that in scenarios where your dog's going to find making a choice very difficult. So, for example, do I chase the squirrel or do I come back to mum or dad? That would be quite hard for a dog to do that hasn't had any practice. But if your dog knows and doesn't doubt that it will get something from you, then it's more likely to make that good choice. That's why it's so important, always reinforce your dog positively every single time it comes back. The second it knows that you didn't give them anything the time before or the time before, it's going to doubt whether you're going to give them something the next time, and therefore they're not as likely to come back. So it's really important, as you're building up your recall training with this dog, never to allow it to doubt that you have something for it.
So this next one's regarding dogs being in the car. So we had a fair few like this. So here's just one example. My dog is happy to get in the car and sits down quietly. After about 10 minutes of driving, she starts high-pitched wailing and panting, which turns into barking when trying to park the car and when the car is standstill. It stops immediately when she gets out. Please, do you have any tips for her? It's very stressful and dangerous for the driver. Thank you.
Gosh, yeah, so absolutely. I would 100% say that safety comes first. And it can be so distracting to have a noisy dog in the vehicle. I would make sure that the dog is secure, first of all, because the other issue is that is the dog able to come to the front and distract the driver further. Ways that I would work with this dog is looking at its arousal level. So effectively, the dog is over aroused, which means it's most likely, from what you describe, very excited to go on the walk. Think about ways to calm the dog down. So yeah, creating a pace by soaking some treats or food and squashing that paste into a container like a Kong or a licky mat can really help. What I also find is that dogs get so excited, sometimes they won't even eat a chew or sit down and chew because they're not relaxed enough to do that in the back of the car. So I would recommend having a second passenger in the car for this kind of training. Either the dog is in the boot, in a crate, or sat next to the passenger attached by a harness. So if the dog is calm to begin with in the first 10 minutes of their journey, I would work on doing, say, an 11 or 12-minute journey, turning around and going back home. So the dog isn't always used to going to that particular walk every time. So you're able to gradually, over lots and lots of repetitions, and I know it involves going out in the car lots of times, but just stretching the amount of time that you're able to travel with the dog without it going over its threshold and starting to bark and whine. That would be one element of training to do with this dog. That is effectively desensitizing it to the car journey. As the dog improves and you're able to travel just a fraction longer, say 12 minutes, 13 minutes, 14 minutes, 15 minutes, then I would include a stop. So stopping the car by the side of the road, turning the engine off, turning the engine on, and driving back home. So again, we're working with the different triggers of this dog. I would make sure that your passenger has some really tasty treats, or even if they make a paste out of some, by soaking some treats or some food, you can put them in a container like this, which is just a silicone squeezy bottle, effectively. Mark and reward. So when I say mark, I mean just say yes to the dog so that it knows that it's being good, and then give them some food via this tube or just a dry treat. So effectively what you're doing is marking and rewarding when the dog is calm or quiet. And as you see the dog starting to get more and more excited as you approach the park, it's likely because it knows the route, or it can smell different smells through the air vents of where it is. I would increase the frequency of the rewards up to literally 1 a second. Yes, yes, yes. And therefore, you're reinforcing before the dog barks, because if you don't reinforce at that sort of frequency really close to, you wait 5 seconds and the dog's barking. And therefore, you've missed that little window of opportunity to mark not barking.
So, which actually brings us on to our next questions quite nicely. The first one being, what are some good ways to help with dog separation anxiety?
So with dog separation anxiety, one of the most common things that we hear is, oh, I've left my dog for 10 minutes and it's distressed. Where you need to start with a dog with separation anxiety is within seconds of you leaving the room. There are so many different aspects to why a dog is distressed when it's left alone. Things like, is it only distressed in a particular place? Is it only distressed at home, but it can be left, say, in the car or at someone else's house or relatives? Then another question would be, does the dog behave differently with different people? So is the dog particularly attached to one member of the household? And it's okay if it's left with that person in the house. So if say, the husband leaves the house, the dog's absolutely fine. But if the husband stays at home and the wife leaves, then it's not fine. First of all, you've got to try and understand why the dog is getting distressed. The mechanics of it is all quite different, and each dog will have different triggers. Then we need to break down the process in terms of time, so working in seconds rather than minutes, to start gradually increasing the level at which the dog can cope, the length of time that it's able to be left alone, and also ensuring that the dog is left in where they find more comfortable, an area where they find it more comfortable. So opening up all the doors of the house and letting it perhaps lie on the bed, because if that's the place that it feels safest, then that is the best place for it to be when we start to work on separation anxiety training. We also need to start making a list of all the triggers to that particular dog. For example, is it our behaviour that starts to affect the way it perceives the environment? So does the dog get triggered when we get our coat or start to put our shoes on, or even say a particular word, school run or shopping? Something like that can become a trigger to a dog because they very quickly learn what comes next. A couple of good recommendations for dogs that struggle to be left alone is, firstly, get the vet to check them just for any underlying issues that could add to their distress. The next thing would be to use some pheromone-based products. So you could have a pheromone collar. A common brand is Adaptil, but those give off appeasing hormones that we can't smell, but the dogs can. Those are generally for milder cases, but as you work through your separation anxiety protocols, once you've understood your triggers, is to break those triggers down into individual exercises that you work with. So for example, if your dog starts to get anxious as soon as you get your coat on, use that scenario purely as your training exercise. So put your coat on, take your coat off, and give your dog some treats. Go and sit back down, watch TV for a bit. The next time I would reach into the cupboard, touch your coat, and close the cupboard, for example, so that you're not even putting it on, because the dog's fear probably starts as soon as you even walk towards your cupboard or your clothes hooks, because they understand what comes next. Repeat that lots and lots of times. So every time you walk past your clothes cupboard, open the door, touch your coat, close the door, throw a dog a treat, and go upstairs, carry on with your day. And the more you do that, the less your dog is going to worry about you picking up your coat. As you build that up, you can then start perhaps putting your coat over your shoulders every time, putting it back. Same process. Then put your coat on fully, and then touch the door, the front door. Take it off, put it back in the cupboard. Those are all examples of things that you can train related to separation anxiety that doesn't even involve leaving the house. Once your dog starts to be more comfortable around those initial triggers, so for example, what I'd be looking for at that point would be, does the dog even look at you when you go and put your coat on, or does it go, oh no, Mum's putting the coat on again, and just completely ignores you and stays in its bed or just carries on doing what it's doing in that moment. So it's not affected at all. That's the point where you know that you can move on to the next sort of level of training, which may be exiting the house for a second and coming back. So you're adding the movement, the sound and the smells of the door and the way you exit the house, but it's not for long. It's literally only for a second, and you come back. Give your dog some praise and treats straight away, so that it then starts to learn that it's not as scary as they thought that mum is leaving the house, because she immediately comes back. So even if they do feel a little bit of fear, the fear subsides straight away. And then, like I said earlier, repeat that process until your dog doesn't react. That means it knows that nothing bad is going to happen. Once you've noticed that your dog starts to ignore you, you can then maybe leave the house for a few more seconds, maybe 2 or 3, and then come back, same process. And you want to do this process really, really gradually. If you rush this process, you could remind that dog how stressful it is that mum leaves. So it's better to establish your really solid building blocks with separation anxiety. Occasional setbacks are inevitable, but the least frequently you have it, the better.
It's really interesting to me how different and unique every dog is, just like a human, because we have, like I said, we have so many dogs sometimes in the office, and we have Wilson, who his owner Adam can leave him and he just doesn't care at all. He's not bothered, and he'll sit there and he'll notice no different. But then we have like Bailey and Wendy, who when their parent leaves, it's just so nerve-wracking for them, and they'll sit at the door and look through the window waiting. I know Bailey as well, he's not particularly fond of treats when they've left as a distraction, and he'll spend a lot of time crying, and then he'll choose to sort of lay on the ground and just stay in this position, and he won't move until someone just either gives him a lot of attention or they come back.
Absolutely. And so taking that into account, the first 2 things I would do is get an indoor camera so that you know exactly what's going on at home while you're out, because a dog can potentially bark as you leave the house, and then after 5-10 minutes settle down, go to sleep, and then after half an hour start to pace and things like that. So, and maybe being quite intermittent in their behaviours, or other dogs, for example, could bark non-stop for the whole time the owner's away. And certainly if they're starting to destroy things in the house, it means they're very, very distressed. So you need to know what's going on in the house. That's not only just for sort of the initial period of what type of anxiety and what level of anxiety you're dealing with, and finding that out at the beginning, but also during the training process, so that as you build up leaving the house for a few more seconds, a few minutes at a time, and et cetera, you can check on your dog and make sure that you're not leaving it too long, and therefore it starts to get distressed and worried again. A dog walker can also help with separation anxiety, but it really depends on the level of what, or the intensity of that separation distress, because if a dog is okay for a few hours, then having a dog walker come in, say at lunchtime, can break up its day. It's not as bored, it's not as lonely, and then if they've had a good play with some other dogs or a good run off the lead, then they're much more settled in the afternoon. So that can be another way to really help dogs that have a certain degree of separation related issues, but not to the point where you can't leave them just for a few hours.
This one did catch my eye a little bit. So, what can I do to stop my dog from eating her own poo? Occasionally I catch her in the act, but not always, and she sometimes eats poo when free running. Not always sure it's hers either.
Now, that is, you definitely don't want to kiss from that dog straight away, do you? But it's a very common issue. And unfortunately, some dogs just like the taste of it, and it is absolutely gross. But one of my old spaniels actually loved the taste of poo. She was a chocolate cocker called Teal, and for her entire life, she just loved the little chocolate snacks that we used to call them. But one way of really managing and helping this behaviour is to pick up poo straight away. Try not to leave any poo in your garden. That might mean going out with the dog during its toilet time and picking it up straight away. I have seen dogs, one dog in particular, who loved poo, who was in a group of dogs off lead in the park, and he actually put his head under the bottom of another dog to try and catch the poo coming out. And so in that case, you really couldn't have been quick enough to pick up the poo. But you need to try and not give them the opportunity. So apart from enjoying the taste, there are a few other reasons why dogs may eat poo. That could include vitamin or mineral deficiencies, or something that they're not getting from the diet that they have at home that is in another dog's diet. And so what I'd recommend there is discussing that with your vet. If your dog is regularly eating poo, there could be another reason apart from enjoying the taste that they are eating poo. And so it's important to get that checked out, make sure that there isn't anything that they're missing.
When we actually started the conversation, it did actually cross my mind. I thought, you know what, that sounds like something a dog would do, is literally put their mouths under another dog. But yeah, I don't know what I'd have done if I'd seen that. How do you even interfere with that? Oh my God.
Well, I ran towards it and said no.
Like you said, I would not be having a kiss from that dog anytime soon.
From a training perspective, once you've established that there's no underlying cause why the dog is particularly aiming for these types of poos, and it really is just a habit or taste, then I would work on recalling away from tempting things. So what I would recommend doing is actually using a little bowl of dog food or kibble and having your dog on a long line attached to a harness, and then seeing if you can call your dog away from that tasty bowl, because effectively that tasty bowl of food is the same or as enticing as a fresh poo. And so you're teaching the dog different choices. You're not letting the dog eat out of the bowl because you're restricting the distance it can get to. But then when it comes away and recalls well, again, lots of treats, lots of very tasty treats. Another word that would be really useful for a dog that eats poo is, well, actually two words, is drop and leave. Now, the difference with drop and leave is drop is let go of whatever's in your mouth. Leave is don't even pick that up. Now, there are different ways to train those, but I would certainly be working on both of those with a dog that picks up poo. So your recall, drop, and leave are the three things that I would really be working on with that dog.
We'll go for the final question, which is, my Staffy is after the cats, which is a normal behaviour for dogs, I guess, but I'm worried that she might hurt them. What training steps do I need to take to teach her not to catch them?
That's a great question. Now, introducing a dog to a household with existing pets is always a bit stressful because you're not sure how the existing pets are going to accept the new. So what you've got to do in this situation is consider the cat as well as the dog. So is the cat comfortable with the dog? With cats, they like to have places nice and high to get out of the way of dogs. So what I'd recommend is, firstly, creating an environment at home that keeps the cat safe. So using plenty of baby gates, so that as long as the cat is mobile and fit enough to jump over the baby gate, they can get away, making sure that the dog doesn't actually chase and get them. Secondly, what I would do is establish a feeding station on a bit of furniture, perhaps in the living room or the dining room, where the dog spends quite a bit of time, making sure that the furniture is quite high, or too high for the dog to jump and scare the cat. Placing a lot of treats, it's water bowl, maybe a cat bed, and some licky licks. Have you heard of licky licks?
Yes, yeah, they kind of look like the yogurt tubes.
Boobs.
Yeah, that's the one.
Create a station for your cat that's safe and out the way of the dog, but still in the same room as the dog. So on this safe station, what you're going to put is your cat's bed, a little bowl of water, some nice treats, and maybe a plate with some licky lick paste spread over it, so that your cat really has a very nice, comfortable, enjoyable time up there. Pop the cat up there, or encourage it to jump up on its own, depending on the cat. Then bring the dog in. Don't bring the dog in and then try and get the cat on this bit of furniture, because your dog might jump up at you and it'll just distress the cat. So cat first, make sure the cat's comfortable, then bring the dog in. When you bring your dog in, make sure it's on a lead, and then do some training with plenty of treats just there on the floor of the living room or the dining room, so that the cat can observe from up high and watch the dog. The dog will know that the cat's there as well. And so they're starting to get used to each other's presence in a calm and enjoyable way for both. You can work on any training exercises with a dog, particularly things like stay or bed. So go to bed, using a soft bed, and a long down, for example, down with duration. So those are calm behaviours that you'd want the dog to do in the cat's presence. So you're working on your obedience as well at the same time. Make sure that you have small breaks of sort of 4 or 5 seconds where your dog can glance up at the cat. What you don't want to do is completely distract your dog so that it just ignores the cat, doesn't necessarily pay it any attention, because you want to bring the cat in on the training, so you want your dog to occasionally glance up at the cat. You're also reinforcing engagement with you rather than chasing the cat. You're managing this because the cat isn't running, it's on the bit of furniture. Once the cat and the dog are more comfortable in each other's presence, what I would do is perhaps have the cat on one side of the baby gate and the dog on the other. Have 2 people do this exercise. One person feeds the cat on one side of the baby gate, and the other person feeds the dog on the other side of the baby gate. Licky mats are fantastic for cats as well as dogs. So you can use your pastes to put on a licky mat for the cat and the dog. Just so, again, they get used to being on the same level as each other, so on the floor, but you're keeping the cat protected by the baby gate so that the dog can't chase it. You're reinforcing that nice calm behaviour, so not chasing, just eating quite close to each other, and seeing if the dog and the cat are comfortable doing that. If the cat runs away, that means that the dog's too close. So I would maybe increase the distance between the cat and the dog, but make sure that the baby gate's still between them. It may take a few days for the cat to be brave enough to be able to eat in the next room from the dog, knowing that it's there, it can see the dog, it can smell the dog through the baby gate. So take your time, and it's all about building that trust and confidence between the cat and the dog. As they improve, you can bring the licky mats, let's say, closer and closer so that the gate is in between. And they're literally eating almost nose to nose, either side of the baby gate. do this until they're more comfortable with each other. This is teaching the dog alternative behaviours other than chasing. Ultimately, dogs are very tempted when something moves. That's just a natural behaviour. I would recommend working first of all on the cat being stationary and the dog being comfortable around the cat and vice versa, stationary. It's a whole different level of training when the cat starts moving.
Thank you, Adelaide, for joining me. I know for a fact that everyone is going to find this super helpful. We get asked all the time on tips for training and how to use our treats, so this is definitely something that everyone's been waiting for. So thank you very much for chatting with me.
You're welcome. It's been such a pleasure and so fun to discuss all these different things.
And if anyone has any other questions for Adelaide, please do send them across and we'll be sure to do a part 2 if this is something that everyone's interested in seeing more of.
I would love to answer your questions and also follow up on the questions that we've also answered today.
100%. If we answered one of your questions, do let us know how you get on with them as well and we will feed back. Be amazing. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much.